He came to her door on a Thursday in October, with a baby against his chest and nothing in his face that asked for pity. The baby was perhaps 6 weeks old, possibly less. Norah Greer could not tell from the doorway, and she had enough experience with infants to know the difference between a healthy newborn and one that was not doing well, and this one was not doing well. The child had the particular stillness of a baby too tired to cry, and the particular color that went with it. And the man holding her had the look of someone who had been watching that stillness for long enough to understand what it meant without yet being willing to say it. He was perhaps 30, perhaps a year or two older, with a week's growth of beard and the frame of a man who was built for hard work and had been doing it. He had ridden a good horse, a dun quarter horse she could see at the gate, well conformed and recently worked, which told her something, and he had the infant against his chest in a sling arrangement he had made from what appeared to be a cotton shirt, which told her something else. He did not say anything when she opened the door. He looked at her, and she looked at the baby, and then at him, and she understood the situation before he had assembled whatever words he had prepared. "Come in," she said. He came in. She had the baby in her arms within 30 seconds of his crossing the threshold, and within 5 minutes she had assessed the infant's condition with the focused competence of a woman who had buried 2 children in their first year and had learned from that loss the difference between what could be helped and what could not. The baby was cold and hungry and beginning to fail, but she was not yet failing past the point of rescue, and Norah said so plainly because plainness was what the man needed and what she was going to give him. "She can be helped," Norah said. "Go sit down and let me work." He went and sat down. She worked. His name was Cole Sutter, and he had been a horsebreaker since he was 17 years old, which made it 18 years now, and he had spent those 18 years moving between outfits across Kansas and Nebraska and into the territories, going where the work was and leaving when it was done. He had a reputation that preceded him. Horses broke correctly, horses that held their training, animals that came back to an outfit willing rather than ruined. The reputation had kept him in consistent work and a decent living for a man who traveled light and needed no particular reason to stay anywhere, and for 17 of those 18 years that had been sufficient. The no particular reason to stay anywhere had changed in September when Clara died. He had not thought of himself as a man who would marry. And then he had met Clara Booker at a church social in Meade County in the spring of the previous year and discovered he had been wrong about this in the way you discovered you were wrong about things that mattered, completely and without warning. They had married in June. She had been 24 years old and clear-eyed and steadier than most people he had known. And she had understood what his work was and what his life was and had decided it was sufficient, which was a thing he had not thought anyone would decide. He had loved her in the particular way of a man who had not known he was capable of it and found it was not difficult at all. She died in September, 3 weeks after their daughter was born, of the fever that followed childbirth in those years and against which there was no remedy anyone in Meade County had access to. He had been with her through the night it got bad, and the morning when it got worse, and the afternoon it ended. And what he had been left with was a daughter who was 3 weeks old and a grief that had no shape he could work around, and the most urgent practical problem he had ever faced in 31 years of living. The daughter needed milk. He could not produce it. The nearest wet nurse was 17 miles distant and had just taken a second infant and had no capacity for a third. He had tried every arrangement he could think of in the 3 weeks between Clara's death and the Thursday morning he rode into the Greer yard. And each one had failed for a different reason. And the baby had not eaten properly in 2 days and had begun to go quiet in the particular way that made him understand he was running out of time. He had not asked for charity in any of those attempts. He had offered work for everything he requested. He had not always been taken at his word. He had kept moving because moving was what was available. Norah Greer was 35 years old and had been a widow for 2 years since James Greer had died of the fever that had taken half the county in the summer of 1878. James had left her the property, 120 acres, a sound house, a good barn, a dairy herd of 11 cows that was the operation's productive center, and the knowledge of how to run it, which she had been acquiring alongside him for 7 years of marriage and which had not failed her in the 2 years since. She was managing. She was doing better than managing. In the honest accounting of things, the dairy was turning a profit, and the property was improved from what it had been when James died, and her fences were sound, and her root cellar was full. She had 2 hired hands for the heavy work, and she managed the dairy and the house herself, and she was not a woman who sat with what was hard rather than working through it. What she had not worked through was the horses. James had brought 4 Mustangs off the range in the spring of the year he died, full of plans for them and the competence to carry the plans out. Broke horses sold for 3 times what Mustangs sold for, and James had understood horses, and he had a buyer already lined up in Dodge City who wanted trained stock in the fall. He had died in August before he could do anything about the horses he had bought in May, and the 4 Mustangs had been in the south pasture for 2 years, unbroken, and costing her the grass they ate, and the fence they tested, and the opportunity cost of what they should have been by now. She could not break them herself. She understood horses well enough to know that understanding horses was not the same as being able to do what Cole Sutter did with them, and she had enough respect for the work to know the difference between knowing a thing and being able to do a thing. She had tried twice to hire someone. The first man she had watched for an hour and sent away because what she saw in that hour told her the horse was going to be handled by force rather than learned, and a horse handled by force was not a trained horse, it was a contained horse, which was not the same and would not hold. The second man she had sent away after 20 minutes for the same reason, but more pronounced. She had been watching the south pasture for 2 years, waiting for someone whose first instinct with a resisting horse was to listen rather than push. The man sitting at her kitchen table with his hands flat on the wood and his daughter making small sounds in Norah's arms did not look, in that moment, like the answer to the Mustang problem. He looked like a man who had come to the end of something and was sitting in that, which she recognized because she had sat in it herself, and you did not ask a man sitting in something like that to demonstrate his qualifications. You gave him time and you watched. She did not say this. She fed the baby with the warmed milk she had ready. She had been milking 11 cows for 2 years, and there was always milk in this kitchen. And she watched the infant take it with the desperate focused greediness of something that has been hungry too long and is now not hungry. And the relief of it moved through the man at the table in a way that was visible and which she let be visible without comment. Because a man's relief at his daughter eating was not something that required management or discretion. When the baby was settled, she looked at him across the table. He was looking at his daughter, and he was not going to look away from his daughter for a while, which she understood, and she waited. When he finally looked up, there was something in his face that had not been there when he came through the door, not the relief, which was still there, but something underneath it, which was the expression of a man getting ready to say a thing that was important. "I can't pay you for the milk," he said. She waited. "Not in cash," he said. "Not right now." He looked at his hands and then back at her. "But I can pay you in work. Any work you need done." He paused. "What do you need most?" She looked at him. She looked at the baby in her arms, sleeping now with the ease of an infant who has finally eaten. She looked at the south pasture through the kitchen window, where the 4 Mustangs were a distant shape in the October afternoon. "Give my baby milk," he said, "and I'll break your wild horses." He said it directly, without embellishment, the way a man states a transaction he means. She looked at the mustangs in the south pasture. She looked at the man across the table. "Can you break them right?" she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at him for a long moment, the way she looked at things she was deciding whether to trust. He held her eyes because he was a man who had nothing to hide and knew how to let that be seen. "All right," she said. "That's the arrangement." He moved into the barn's tack room that evening, which was where he said he would sleep, and which she did not argue about because she was a practical woman who understood that proprieties existed for reasons, and that a man sleeping in the tack room was a different thing from a man sleeping in the house. The tack room was dry and had a stove fitting. And she sent Wheeler, the younger of her two hands, over with a length of stovepipe and an hour's work, and by nightfall Cole Sutter had a sleeping space that was cold but not dangerously so. The baby slept in the house, in the small room off the kitchen that had been the nursery for Norah's own children, and which she had kept furnished because she had not been able to make herself change it. She did not say this to Cole. She said there was a room that would do, and it would, and the baby needed warmth more than the tack room could provide in October, and he had understood and accepted. She heard the baby at 2 a.m, and she heard herself get up for it before she was fully awake, the body's memory of that particular sound doing what it had always done. The baby was not hers. She knew this. She warmed the milk and fed her in the dark of the kitchen, and the baby took it with the focused urgency of a 6-week-old who had learned in the first weeks of her life that food was not reliable and was going to make the most of it when it came. Cole came to the kitchen doorway at 2:30. He stood there and looked at his daughter and at Norah, and she looked up and they held each other's eyes for a moment in the dark kitchen with the lamp turned low, and neither of them said anything because there was nothing that needed saying that the situation had not already said. He went back to the tack room. She put the baby down and went back to bed. And she lay in the dark and thought about the fact that she had gotten up for a child that was not hers without deciding to, and about what that meant, and about the south pasture and the mustangs. And then she stopped thinking about any of it and went to sleep, because tomorrow started early and had work in it. He was in the south pasture at first light. She watched from the fence that ran between the pasture and the dairy barn, because she needed to see what he did before she gave him all 4 horses to do it with, which she had told him at breakfast and which he had accepted as fair. She was watching for the things she always watched for when she was assessing whether a man knew horses, whether the horse told him where he was in the first 5 minutes, whether he listened to what the horse told him, whether he used what the horse gave him or tried to override it. The mustang he had asked for first was the bay gelding, 4 years old, the most resistant of the 4. She had told him this. He had said that was the one he wanted to start with, which was not the answer she expected, and which was the right answer. He worked the bay in the round pen for 2 hours without a saddle. She watched from the fence rail with her coffee going cold in her hands, and she watched the horse, and she watched him, and she watched the conversation between them, which was what horsebreaking was when it was done right, a conversation rather than a contest, a process of establishing understanding between 2 parties rather than the dominance of one over the other. He was patient in a way that was not passive. He was persistent in a way that was not punishing. He read the horse's ears and his shoulder and the set of his hindquarters, and he adjusted what he was doing in response to what he read, and the horse, over the course of 2 hours, went from fighting the conversation to engaging with it. She had watched horsebreaking for 20 years. She had not seen it done this well since her father, who had been the best horseman she knew, and who had taught her the difference between breaking and educating, and who would have approved of what she was watching. Wheeler came and stood at the fence beside her at the end of the first hour. "He's good," Wheeler said. "He is," she said. She went back to the dairy at mid-morning. because the dairy did not watch itself, and she worked through the afternoon with the awareness of the south pasture behind her and the sounds that came from it, hoofbeats and patterns. The specific sounds of a horse being worked through its early resistance, and she let the sounds tell her what they were telling her, which was that the man was still doing it right. He came to supper with the particular tiredness of a man who had spent 8 hours doing skilled physical work and had not wasted a minute of it. She could see it in the deliberate way he sat down, the way a man sat when his legs had been working all day and were done. He ate what she set in front of him, salt pork and beans and cornbread, the working supper of a working kitchen, without commentary and without leaving any of it, and he thanked her when he was done in the way he thanked her for things, which was simply and once. He asked about the baby. She had been in the kitchen with Wheeler's wife at noon and had been eating well. He said good. He said it the way he said most things, as a complete thought. The bay is coming along, he said. I think the roan will go faster. I thought the roan would be easier when James bought them, she said. The bay always had the most resistance. He looked at her. You know these horses, he said. I've been watching them for 2 years, she said. From the fence. I couldn't do what you're doing, but I know what they are. He nodded, the nod of a man taking in information that changes something in his accounting. I watched you this morning, she said, at the round pen. I know, he said. I could see you at the fence. She looked at her plate. It's good that you watched, he said, not a performance of modesty. A statement. Good that you watched, because the watching was relevant, and you had a right to it, and you were the one whose judgment about these horses mattered. She looked at her plate and thought about what it was like to be in a room with someone who said what he meant without surplus, and who expected her to do the same, and who seemed unsurprised that she was capable of it. James had been like that. She had not been in a room with that quality since James, and she had not known she was missing it until it was there again. She did not say any of this. She cleared the table. He helped because he had been helping since the first evening without being asked to, and she had stopped being surprised by it somewhere in the first week. October moved into November, and the arrangement settled into something that was no longer an arrangement, but simply the way things were, in the way that things which work well become simply the shape of the days they are part of. Coal broke the roan and the gray in the second and third weeks of October. The roan was as easy as he had predicted, and the gray was not quite as easy as the roan, but was not difficult for a man who could read what a horse was saying before it said it loudly. The fourth horse, a young mare that had been the most untouchable when James brought them in, was the one that took the time. He spent 2 full weeks on her in November, patient and consistent, and not once losing his temper, which she observed at intervals from the fence and from the dairy barn doorway, and the mare by mid-November could be saddled and ridden at a walk and a trot, and would stand for the mounting block without an argument. The 4 horses were done. The arrangement was done. She had not said anything about what happened when the arrangement was done. He had not said anything either. They had not discussed it. She had been aware throughout October of the fact that the arrangement had a natural endpoint, and she had been aware also throughout October of the fact that she was not thinking about the endpoint as something she wanted to arrive. She was not going to do anything about this until she understood it, and she had not had the time to understand it, because November on a dairy farm with 11 cows and 120 acres was not a season with time in it. November brought the first hard weather on the 16th. It came down from the north in the night, and by morning the temperature was the kind that tested everything. Every fence joint, and every water line, and every stored provision, and every decision you had made in September about whether you had done enough to prepare. She was up before it was light with the practical certainty of a woman who had been running this property for 2 years and knew what cold nights required. What she found when she came out to the barn was Cole Sutter already there, working the water trough with a hatchet in the pre-dawn dark, his breath making clouds, breaking the ice that had set in the night so the cattle could drink in the morning. He had not been asked to do this. The 4 horses were broken. The arrangement was concluded. He had no particular reason to be at her water trough at 5 a.m. breaking ice in the first hard freeze. She stood in the barn doorway and looked at him. He looked up. She said, "The arrangement is finished. You don't owe me anything more." He set the hatchet down on the edge of the trough. He looked at her in the cold gray of the early morning and he said, "I know that." She waited. "I'm not here because of the arrangement," he said. She looked at the trough, which was clear of ice now, and at the cattle already moving toward it in the cold. She looked at her breath and his breath making clouds in the same cold air. She said, "The baby will need milk through the winter." "She will," he said. "And I'll need the south pasture fenced properly before the snow comes," she said. "James started it the spring he died, and the north corner is still wrong." He looked at the fence line she was indicating. "I can fix the north corner," he said. "I know you can," she said. She picked up the hatchet and handed it back to him, and she went inside to start the breakfast, and he finished the water trough, and when he came in 20 minutes later the kitchen was warm and the coffee was on, and the baby was making the small satisfied sounds of an infant who has eaten and is deciding what to think about next. She set a plate for him. He sat down. The 4 horses sold in December when Silas Greer's nephew came up from Dodge City looking for trained stock and paid the full price for all 4 without negotiating. Because trained horses in December were not something you negotiated about if you needed them. The money was more than the property had seen in a single transaction in 2 years. And Norah sat with the bank receipt for a long time before she put it in the tin in the kitchen drawer. She thought about what to say to Cole about the horses and the sale and what it meant about the arrangement that had started everything. And she thought about the morning at the trough and the north fence corner and the baby's milk, and she thought, he did not come here because of the arrangement, and the arrangement is not why he is still here, and the question is not about the horses. She went to find him at the south pasture, where he was working the fence corner James had started and not finished. He heard her coming and he finished the wire wrap he was on and looked up. "The horses sold," she said. "I heard," he said. "Wheeler told me." She looked at the fence. It was straight and right in a way it had not been for 2 years, the corner post plumb and the wire taut to the correct tension. "That's good work," she said. "It needed doing," he said. She looked at the fence and at the south pasture and at the man who had come through her door in October with a baby who was failing and had offered her the only thing he had to offer, and she thought about the winter that was coming and what it required and who she wanted to require it with. "The winter will be long," she said. "This is a hard county in January." "I know it," he said. "I can't pay you a wage," she said. "The horses are sold and the dairy will carry us through winter, but there's nothing extra." "I'm not asking for a wage," he said. She looked at him. "I'm asking," he said quietly, "for a different kind of arrangement." The November wind moved through the south pasture, and the grass bent with it, and the repaired fence held its line. Behind her, in the house, the baby was with Wheeler's wife for the afternoon, which was the arrangement for afternoons when Cole was at the fence and Norah needed both hands free for the dairy work, and which had become simply the way of afternoons on this property, the same way most things had become simply the way of things since October. She said, "What kind?" He said, "The permanent kind." She was quiet for a long time. She looked at the fence he had fixed, and at the pasture and at the sky coming in low with the weather that was on its way. She thought about what winter needed. It was not, she understood now, standing at the fence in the November cold, what she had thought it was in October when he had come through her door with a baby and an offer and nothing else to his name. October had needed the horses broken and the baby fed. Those things had been settled. What winter needed was not that. What winter needed was the man standing in front of her, who had come because his daughter needed milk and had stayed because there was something here he had not found in 18 years of moving between outfits, and who was asking her now for the permanent kind, and who she understood in the particular clear way you understood things when you had been watching someone work for long enough to. See their character in the working was exactly what he had offered and not anything he had not. "All right," she said. "That's the arrangement." She said it the way she had said it in October, at the kitchen table, with the baby in her arms. He recognized it because he had been listening to her since October, and he almost smiled. She turned and walked back toward the house. After a moment, she heard him set down the fencing pliers and follow. The north corner held through the winter without shifting. The baby grew and thrived and learned to make a sound that was almost a laugh. The dairy ran as it had run, and the milk was sufficient, and on the mornings when the cold was serious, Cole was at the water trough before Norah came out to it, and she stopped being surprised by this in December, and in January she stopped noticing it because it was simply part of how the mornings went, which was what you called a thing when it had become the way things were. Winter needed him most. She had known this since November, since the fence corner, since the particular clear way you understood something when you had been watching someone work long enough that you knew their character in it and not just their skill. She had known it, and she had said all right, which was the same word she had used in October at the kitchen table with the baby in her arms and the horses in the south pasture and a stranger asking for a fair trade, and she had meant it both times, and all right was sufficient. In the mornings of that winter, when she heard him at the trough in the cold dark before she had come out herself, she did not need to say anything else, and she did not. And the not saying was its own kind of thing that she was not going to examine too closely, because it was good, and some good things were better left as simply what they were.